Welcome back. Another week, another Humpday Q&A.
I put that
So,
down.
let's get rid of that. There we go.
There we go.
Let's do that. Let's get through the usual startup sequence, and then we can get going on to some cool stuff. So,
I agree.
Yeah. Welcome again. We're going to be joined by Danielle and Swav this week. A couple of members from the community. We'll go through that in a minute. Scott, do's and don'ts. Go for it.
Be nice, be respectful, be constructive. This is YouTube, not Reddit. Don't post anything that's adult, rude, offensive. Don't advertise or promote your service. We're not here looking for a job. You're not here trying to get people to pay you money. Don't keep posting the same question over and over again. Every time we get a new question, it goes to the bottom of the list. If you had asked it before, it comes off the top of the list and goes back to the bottom. Harassment of any kind, come on, this is a no-brainer. But the one thing you may or may not know is if you get kicked out of here, we share a ban list with Discord and Slack and all these others. So also make sure to have a good time. This is supposed to be fun.
Indeed. My name is Simon Lightfoot, Flutter Community Leader and CTO at Dev Angels London. And you can follow me on Twitter at Dev Angels London. Scott?
I am Scott Stahl. I am also a community leader, organizer of GDG Cleveland at Scott Stahl 2017 on Twitter. And word is I write some Flutter code from time to time.
Yeah. Randall.
And I'm Randall Schwartz. I'm a Dart and Flutter Google developer expert from the very beginning of the program for them. And I'm also the question magician for this show. What that means is that I am watching the chat room, watching for you to put a Q colon in front of your question, and I will put it in our queue. Ooh, see what I did there? In order to have it answered during the show. So please put your questions, mark them carefully. Otherwise, I will consider them merely chatting amongst yourselves.
So you're keeping a list and you're watching to make sure that people are nice, not naughty. Because if they're naughty, they go back to the bottom of the list.
That's right.
Santa.
I'm good at that.
Yeah. They get taken off the Christmas list. And we're also joined right now with Swav. Swav, yes. Hey, welcome to the stream.
Hello. Yeah,
hey,
so
Swav,
I'm GDE.
Yeah,
as
introduce
well.
yourself, Swav. Go on.
GDE, another GDE, just another GDE in Flutter and Dart. Also, Flutter lead at Kidden Carta. Yeah.
One of us.
Yeah, one of us. Yes.
Hey, real quick thing before we get started. Note, these are Battlestar Galactica qubits from the 1970s. And these are the updated ones for 2023.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. You've been having way too much fun with that new 3D printer.
How much water we can buy with it?
Yeah.
How much water? No, I haven't been doing anything with the 3D printer. Why do you ask?
Cool.
Right.
All right, moving on.
And before we get going, yeah, as we said, get your questions in chat with the queue in front. For any of us, we will be joined by Danielle. She'll be joining us about half an hour into the show later on. She couldn't make it for the beginning, but you get your questions in now. The earlier you get them in, the earlier we can get them answered. Any Flutter Dart related question, any programming related question, I'm sure we'll have some comment to say on it. And if not, we'll let you know that as well.
And there will be a time towards the end of the show when we there will be a time towards the end of the show when we have to cut questions off. That's usually about a half hour before the end of the show. So be sure you get your questions in early. If you go past the cutoff, I tell you to come back in 166 hours when our next show happens.
And the formula for that, actually, it is not a subjective guess. We look at what time we want to stop. We divide that by 2, which allows 2 minutes per question. When we have that many questions in the queue, we have to cut it.
Yeah, somehow we always do like
it's never accurate.
Yeah,
we always go
it's
over
never
it
2
anyway.
minutes per question.
Yeah, it should be 3 or 4 now. I think it's probably
10.
should readjust.
So the strategy should be prepare your questions before the stream starts.
Yes. Yeah, there you go. That's the best way to get them answered. Yeah. We already have 3 of those. So
it's like when dealing with the government, you have to call them at 8 a.m. in order to make sure you get on the schedule.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Randall,
all right.
Yeah. Well, what's the other thing we say? Share the stream amongst your friends, right? Like make sure.
Oh yes, right. Yes, we see plenty of people watching this show during the week afterwards. That's fine. We like that, but it's a lot more fun if you actually join live because you get your questions in, you get to chat with your friends. We get to chat directly with you. Sometimes we're not. There's stuff that happens. It's off the stream. We're just in the chat. So yeah, come on and play with us. It's fun. We do it every week.
And I will mention
relatives.
that
We don't care. We'll take them all.
And I will mention right now, get this out of the way, the CFP for FlutterCon in Berlin, the premier, I'm going to call it I'm just going to call this the premier Flutter conference this year in Europe. Yeah, sure, why not?
Oh God.
Fluttercon.dev. Go file your papers, get your talks in place, and maybe you'll get to fly out and do a talk at the conference. You know,
cool.
You do realize Majid's trying to book a cruise ship for the Norway event, so he's going to have something to say about that word premier.
Wow.
It's just like all those adverts, right? It's just like we're number one. Who says you're number one? We do.
That's
right?
like America. We're number one in what?
Yeah.
I know,
Not much anymore. Anyway, enough of that.
I think there's
politics.
something called questions, unless we have anything. What's new in Flutter? You know, but we should do that. What's new? What's new in the past couple of weeks? I mean, besides like Raspberry Pis and Mango Pis and Cherry Pis.
I tell you, just something to start things off, which I thought was kind of interesting.
We had the two releases 2 days apart. That was pretty fast.
Yeah.
Just recently,
Hot
but I think that was before last show. So
I had to invalidate my cache in Dart because of it.
I really didn't mess you up that badly.
Yeah. So I couldn't build after some updates.
Oh.
There are so many things going on. I mean, I'm looking into using a server on Cloud Run and maybe putting another server onto a Raspberry Pi.
Yeah.
And then try hooking it up with an ISAR database and see what kind of silliness I can make it do between them. Just call one function from my end and have them starting to call each other. Go a little crazy.
And this week's Riverpod news, Remy added stream provider in the modern technology instead of the legacy technology. So that's a big change for Riverpod. It basically means I no longer have to talk about any of the legacy providers because I had to keep talking about stream provider all the time. Now you can actually do a stream notifier.
Wasn't Remy talking about actually getting away with stream provider and just having essentially the listen in place? He was
thinking about that, but he got crazy and said, "Oh, you know what? Just cut and paste async notifier over to stream notifier, and it's done." And he did. It was just like over a period of a couple of hours, one late night a couple days ago. So yeah, so there's a new version of Riverpod. There's also the lint is getting so much better. The rewrites because of that are getting better. The generator is getting better. It's Remy is unstoppable. This Riverpod is really
just updated my sample.
Paying work, or otherwise he's
yeah. definitely. So anyway,
all right.
So James, I was gonna say, James, that's kind of what I was talking about with Raspberry Pi RISC-V. A little bit more fun with the 3D printer. I actually made something that exposed all the headers and ports. But yeah, this is what I'm looking at. It's actually RISC-V, not Raspberry Pi.
I'll mention as well. I found this new widget in the master API. I was doing some work and I came across this interesting new widget. Let me see if I can get that up bigger so people can read it.
I'm trying to figure out where that's used and where would I be using it? Probably not.
So basically, all of all of the build context, like find methods, like find ancestor and find ancestor inherited widget, and all this. What? Basically, lookup boundary stops them. So the idea is that when you go up the tree, they all get halted by a lookup boundary. So it allows you to kind of subdivide your hierarchies a bit more. I feel like I'll be honest with you, it feels to me like it adds more complexity than it needs to right now, but I'm guessing they found a reason for adding this widget.
Why would you want to, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing, I'm asking, what is a use case where you might want to prevent other teammates or something who are coding from reaching into the context and accessing?
No, that. It's like when you have your tree, right? I'll give you a good example. It's when we first did provider. Let's say you did provider a string, which would be a really bad idea, but you know what I mean. Like that means anytime I wanted a string from provider, it would go get that one, right? Now this would allow me to put a lookup boundaries maybe on the tab level, and each one could have its own separate string entity in provider, then separate, right?
Right. Because the identifier for providers classes, classes
because they class you. And that's what this is doing, right? So when the lookup for exact type happens, you give it your
and this could be put in any branch of the tree, thereby only affecting a certain branch, whether that's within a page or cutting off an entire page.
I have a feeling this is leading towards a callback. There's going to be a callback in inherited widget. Should I respond to this query? So you can put arbitrary Dart code there. That would be next.
So what are you thinking? A custom widget would extend lookup boundary?
No, you would put it essentially to limit where you're looking.
It's in the tree. It's actually in the tree. It's like the way a provider is. It sits in the tree.
Okay, because I didn't notice is there a parameter type to tell it to not?
Okay. No. It does everything. It just blocks.
It cuts off everything, not a specific widget.
No, it stops basically the ancestor operations going up the tree, right?
So it basically kills everything
for that class.
Trying to reach for anything up higher than that.
Yeah,
for that class, right?
Yeah, I thought it might be just for a certain type.
No, it's for all types. I think, from what I can understand.
Okay. Anyway, new widgets are coming out. They're still at work. The guys in Mountain View are still at work. Yes.
I almost kind of want a feed, just for widgets when a new widget's added to the merged into the code base. Any class that extends any of the widget class. Eventually, the base class is widget. I kind of want that to be announced on a feed somewhere because they keep changing.
To everyone asking questions, to everyone asking questions in the chat, we don't know any more than what we just said. So you can just go look at the thing.
Yeah. Put it in a Dart pod and see what happens.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
I don't think it's a separate context. I just think it's preventing a lookup higher than that point. Yeah. But it is being past the current context. It's just you can't reach up higher in the tree.
Sure.
Yeah. Anyway.
So I'm responding to
This Week in Widgets.
Oh, someone else. Okay. This Week in Widgets.
There you go.
Cool.
Name your favorite widget, and we will cover one a week.
That was another one that
could be actually.
That was another one that came.
Oh up yes, yes.
I did.
This is good.
The continuous border rectangle, right? Like
the Ovaltine one.
This is basically what we call what was there's a couple of names. So it's Squircle was the one I remember, right? Which is a square circle, which is the iOS kind of shape, right? And with this set to a very high number, you get that kind of shape.
Yep.
You get a Squircle?
Yeah.
Actually, no, they said in the thread, it said that in the thread they said this is not the Squircle. This is sort of buttons on some of the things. That's not quite a Squircle.
Yeah, it's like a few pixels off from it being that. But I mean, it's good. Yeah, enough, right. Like a lot of the time. But
anyway,
there's some interesting.
People looking at pixel resolution to make it mimic iOS and Android, though. That's the fun part. Is that at least there are people having this conversation.
Implementation. I've still got that up in my.
Yes, this was not about creating a Squircle. This is about creating that ovalish shape that's rounded over a larger area. It's not just a change in radius. It's kind of the tight to loose curve as you go around the oval.
All right, so, I'm curious about something. We have a request for live coding, but if we do that, then we have to. Whoa! Don't spam that question. You put it twice within 3. Good way to get put at the bottom of the list. But I've got to. I have to address it right now for planning purposes, because if we're going to do an hour of live coding, then that changes how many questions we can take.
Yeah.
So
or it changes when we It changes when we finish the show. It might be 3 hours instead of 2.
No.
No.
That's always a
There's many things to
possibility
do over
with
here.
Simon.
Right.
But yeah, if we're going to do some live coding.
Let's get into the
we
questions.
Need to decide that.
No, we don't. Let's get into the questions. We'll decide it live.
Let's get into the questions. Right. All right. What's the first one on our list here?
Okay, we've got 20 minutes worth of questions. Shorebird's Flutter code push demo.
Is that super exciting? Can you discuss it? So no, that's so first of all, Shorebird, if people don't know, Eric Seidel left the Flutter team and he started up his own startup, Shorebird. And Shorebird is their from what I can tell, first of all, they're completely open source. Everything they're doing is on the website or on the repo. It's all there. And their primary thing, from what I can tell from that, is serverless Dart and code push. So that sounds quite interesting. I have not looked into any of the details about how it works or anything. So,
do you think this guy knows what he's doing?
Yeah, exactly right. So if people don't know, Eric Seidel is one of the co-founders of Flutter. To be clear.
Ian Hickson.
If you don't know who Eric is, you should see the Matrix video.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, he was the lead engineer.
For
4 years.
Can someone link it? It's on YouTube. Just find the Flutter Matrix video.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to see if I can find it.
Well, while you're doing that, and actually, we welcome basic questions. We really do. Yeah. Stuff that you need advanced calculus for is fine, but when it's 100% of your question base, it gets a little old.
Yeah.
I know this might seem very basic, but in Stream Builder and Future Builder, how do I check if it's empty and if it's not loading? I've seen online they combine both, but I'd like to know each. Well, the difference though is that if it's empty, it's going to complete, right? If it's not empty, or if it's not done loading, then it's not going to complete.
Yes. So I don't totally understand this question, because it's like you find out the way that every document about Stream Builder and Future Builder tells you to. You call connection state, and you figure out what state it is, and you go to a bunch of if else's to figure out which thing you want to be running.
Yeah, I don't understand about seeing online they combine both, but they should, because one is not complete.
The question here assumes that essentially you're waiting for a future to complete, right? Or we have a stream and we're waiting for something to pull out. But you should actually throw the state which represent what is actually happening. So if your load failed because there's no network, then your stream should send an object which says network error, and then you react to it, and then you have a result with a payload, and you use this payload. And this is how you work with the stream.
How can I check if it's empty? Well, sorry. How you says here stream? How can I check if it's empty?
Or null.
So first of all, so when your stream starts, you'll see that the async snapshot has a connection state. The connection state denotes where it is in the cycle of the async processing. If it's a stream, it's active, which means it's receiving results, or it's received at least one result. When it's set to, I think it's none, it means it's at the very beginning state. It hasn't got the first result back from the stream or from the future. Now, it'll go to done in Stream Builder when it's closed, and in Future Builder once it's finished the future. At that point, inside your build function, you can say if connection state is equal to done, and the data is like an empty array, then now you know it's definitely empty, right? Like it didn't start off empty, you received an empty. And then, that also tells you if it's done loading or not, right? So, but it's really what Swav is saying is a nicer way of handling that, right? Where the data, you have a starting state, your initial data is like state loading, right? Or whatever your model is. And then each time you get an event back from the stream, you're wrapping that the data or the error or whatever it is in some sort of state, and that lets you kind of easily sort of manage that. Also, at that point, you could also just build your own little widget instead of Stream Builder or a Future Builder, right? If you go look at them, they're quite straightforward.
Or use a provider. Those are much nicer.
Yeah.
Riverpod providers really take a lot of the mechanism out of this, and also a lot of the boilerplate, and also guarantee that you're covering all the cases.
Just
usually for building this kind of objects, if you use some sealed class kind of representative like freeze, that is going to give you essentially, this is my error state, this is my loading state, this is my other error state, this is my success, and success actually has that parameter payload. And then inside a widget, you have this thing, you get it from somewhere, and you do when. And when is error, this widget. When is loading, then circular, spinner, or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So it says there, I meant like if there's an error, specifically a network error. So again, you can try catch in your future or your stream, whatever you're doing, your network piece, wrap that error in your own exception, and then you can either throw that exception and catch it as the error object inside the async snapshot you get back, or as we said, wrap it in a state object and you return that back as a value saying state network error, right? And then you can show something appropriate to the user.
This is going to be so much nicer with patterns, because we're going to be able to ensure that we have switches that include every different case that you've defined to make sure it's exhaustive. This is going to be great. I'm looking forward to patterns.
Also, I mean, like this kind of wrapping is perfect for records as well. It's like this notion
and
of
records,
and records. So you kind of this whole thing kind of it makes a lot more sense later. Anyway,
soon.
I will mention soon. I will mention
Alpha
that
or the master channel of Dart. Play with it.
Yeah. So I will mention, go look at a couple of videos ago when we played around with it. I will mention that you get a timeout. Is it timeout exception? You can definitely get a socket exception. A socket exception is like your base kind of network failed, and you get a timeout exception when it's not. These are kind of the base ones, but that's just like I failed to communicate, and then you have an exception on top, which would be from like the HTTP or gRPC or whatever the network stack is that you're using, and that might throw its own set of errors like HTTP exception. So the best thing is read the docs. That'll tell you where it gets thrown, and then you try catch it and deal with it how you must.
Yep.
Inside the widgets again. Like if something throws inside a future stream builder, it will be caught and handled to the async snapshot, and then you'll see the error parameter, and it has a getter called has error, and has error will tell you if it's got an error, and then you can look at the error object and say you can do an if statement saying snapshot.error is like HTTP exception, and then you can then extract the reason or why or whatever you want. But normally you want to handle that on the back end and return a nice sort of front end state to your UI.
Right. And the provider Riverpod actually gives you this async value wrapper that can give you the loading versus data versus error in a really nice parsable way.
Nice.
Yes. I think we've answered that one.
Cool.
What do we got next?
John. No, John can't ask a question.
Yep.
We need John to come on here. John is one of the most knowledgeable people in Flutter and iOS out there. It's kind of funny because he wants to do Flutter full time, but he keeps getting great job opportunities with iOS because he's such an expert on it. Anyway,
I can answer this one.
What are sorry?
Yeah.
What are your views on GitHub Copilot, basically ChatGPT Lite? Is it any good for working with Dart and Flutter? Demo request.
I'm not going to demo it.
And the thing is too, it's like it's comparing that to live templates in IntelliJ. Live templates really kind of win out there because what ends up happening with GitHub Copilot when you're using it is that, and I'll set something up and show it a little bit later, but what ends up happening is when you use GitHub Copilot, it fills out the parameters for you. And then you either accept it and it fills out all those parameters and moves your cursor way down, or you skip the whole thing. But you can't accept it and then change parameters smoothly. You have to accept it and then move the cursor up and change it. Whereas with live templates, if you're using IntelliJ, or snippets, if you want to go through all the JSON setup in VS Code, you just enter it and the cursor does the same thing, except it moves the cursor to the parameter. And then it moves to the next parameter and the next parameter. So you don't get stuck accepting some default.
That's not the problem that Copilot solves, though. So let me explain how I've been using Copilot in earnest, very actively. I'm paying the $10 a month. Yes, it's not free, but totally worth it because it saves me so much time. It guesses what the next code is that I'm going to write. Its accuracy is about that of ChatGPT, and it either promotes a lot of code, like it thinks it's going to make that's all going to work, and it might not. But if it does promote a lot of code and it does work, I'm done with that section. And it's filled in tons of stuff that I would have taken a long time to get to. And I have seen it spookily. For example, suppose you have a class and you're building your own constructors and your own equality and things like that. So you're not using a package for that. And you've already filled out like the 5 props you have. And then you add a 6th prop. It somehow figures out what to put on the other parts of your class for that new prop name that you just added. Yeah, so it's not a template. It is actually taking this code and putting it down there. It is really spooky.
I think I said this before when we were talking about this, but I think my viewpoint on Copilot, first of all, I've been playing around with it recently, and I do like it. I think, though, that as a beginner developer, it's not a good idea because having it cover you, first of all, you don't know what it's making is correct or not, right? Like there's an assumption that when you can look at those suggestions, go, I need to change this here, here, and here because you know the API. What it's done is it's saved you typing as a sort of a senior developer, right? You don't have to type all that because it's kind of guessed ahead what you're going to type, which is nice. But as a junior, you're not learning anything by using it, right? I don't think it's going to be good.
It's going to overload by
relying on it.
You still need to make a judgment essentially if this is really what we needed or not. And as someone who's beginning, I don't know. I'm building this thing for the first time in my life. I don't know if this actually is it. Okay, let's try it. And
it's a good junior assistant, but you can't be the assistant too. It's a good junior assistant, and I'll say it's also a lot better than using ChatGPT to do the same thing because it is trained primarily on code. And it will give you 10 different possible choices if you press a particular key combo. And you can go, oh, wait, choice 7 is exactly what I want. So it's definitely, I say, totally worth the $10 a month. And I'm fine with paying that. And
what is it again?
Just hoping it gets better.
What is it again? Control bracket that does it?
Oh, I don't know. I haven't entirely remapped. I have remapped stuff, but I can't tell.
Alt square bracket left and square bracket right.
There was option tick does something on a Mac. I don't know exactly.
Now this is what I'm talking about. You can't change any of these. You can't change the angle or the width.
But you can tab it and come back. That's what I can do.
And that's what I'm talking about here is
you can also go to the next one or the previous one and see if that helps better.
Right. Whereas if you're doing something like a live template, okay.
It's a little small if you can pop it up one. There we go. Thank you.
But now these are just some of mine. That puts a child that's a column. If you see what little things like that, but the difference between them is you get to put in the width and the height and the color. Now, this would be fantastic if you selected this. It should move the cursor to the width and offer to change it. And if you hit tab, then it moves to the height, then to the and it works its way down so you can change different parameters. That would be amazing. But another thing too, as they were saying, it's an interesting beginner's tool.
That's probably more of a like a plugin thing, right? Like it's not really Copilot per se. It's more of a Copilot plugin for IntelliJ, right?
Come on.
Like,
okay. Well, let's say for whatever reason, I know, real quick. But what we were saying there is like down here, you see the container. Well, a container would be a bad choice because you can't make it constant, especially if you're just trying to do a colored box. And that's where the experience comes in, because you were saying that it's okay for beginners. But the thing is, a beginner should be taught you don't use a container for just a white box. You want to use the size box with a colored box. And this doesn't know that. So, and I don't, how many other bad habits might it teach? I don't know.
So John here just said Copilot is learning from code within GitHub and figuring out what to suggest. Yes, it is. It does also, but the key thing here is it's not just like generally what's on Copilot, but what's locally in your project as well. So
yeah,
and that's really where the power comes in. And there is also privacy things. You can say, don't submit my code and don't analyze my code, don't do all that kind of stuff, right? So you have got those options.
I was just doing a project where I'm converting a provider over to Riverpod. And so they have 35 different providers. So I have to one at a time go through, find all the uses of it, and replace a select call with a consumer wrapper, and then grab final, this thing is the select of that provider, that sort of stuff. I did 4 or 5 of them. And after that, Copilot absolutely suggested exactly what I was going to do on the next one every single time. So it understood from the 4 or 5 that I did. Now it's got the pattern. Now I can just add it as I need. And it's pretty amazing.
That's good that it can learn.
Yeah, it is learning my code because it's looking at my
Speaking of people who can teach and learn, Danielle has been doing amazing work helping people learn, and especially helping with the Flutteristas. I wonder where she is.
I'm right here.
Right there.
Yeah. 2 weeks in a row I'm at home. This is awesome.
So
I'll be stepping out back for a while. I'll see you guys.
Well, I don't want to chase you off, Randall.
No, it's fine. I just like the layout of 4 better than 5.
Okay.
Well, yeah, but we need 4 more to do the Brady Bunch.
Right. So.
Right. Have you tried, Danielle? Before we get off topic here, move on to more questions. Have you tried GitHub Copilot yet?
I have not yet. I'm very curious about it. So I was, the one thing I saw when I hopped on backstage and saw this was going on, is that I'm gonna have to go back and watch this part of the episode so I can figure out how to do it. I've noticed that, the way IntelliJ starts, getting smarter about what it suggests on autocomplete. I can't imagine what some real smarts would do.
It's quite interesting. So there's a web page on GitHub for Copilot. You can sign up for free as a free trial. There is a paid for thing, right? So as an individual, I think it's $10 a month. And but yeah, I mean, try it, right? If it feel like it's actually giving you $10 worth a month, then it's a worthwhile investment. And then there's a plugin for IntelliJ and VS Code and all that gives you that kind of extra stuff. But yeah, anyway, all right, moving on before we get stuck on one thing. Right, next question. My app uses Firebase messaging. I'm having difficulty. Gone.
You didn't let me introduce myself this time.
Oh, sorry. I'm dashing ahead.
I'm totally happy for just assuming now that I'm here so much that people know who I am.
Oh, you're here every week. Go on. But yeah, go on, introduce yourself. Go for it.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, hey everybody. I'm Danielle. I'm based out of Florida in the United States. I run a team of Flutter developers at a small startup called Ardley. And yeah, I'm trying to be here enough where I am considered part of, where I don't get announced as a guest. I'm just here. But as long as I'm announced as a guest, I think I should probably introduce myself, because it means I haven't been here for the year or 2 or 3 or whatever it takes that you guys have been doing this, past that. Yeah, I know, right? And so, yeah. So everybody.
I will mention that you're also co-organizer and owner or whatever.
organizer. Yeah.
Flutteristas as well, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, actually, amazing news is we're discussing our plans coming up. That's where I was. Sorry, I'm late, everybody. We were having a meeting discussing the second Flutterista conference, which I think we're gonna, it looks like we're gonna host that in September, and then also we may have some Flutterista activities going on at FlutterCon. So that was kind of what I was just discussing in meetings today. So it's pretty amazing. I'm excited. I can't wait to see everybody there because I plan on being there. So anyway, all right. Sorry to interrupt. I just figured you would want me to introduce myself.
Indeed. Sorry for me missing it. Right. All right. Let's see. Question. My app uses Firebase messaging, and I'm having difficulty writing widget tests because Firebase.initialize app. How do I mock it? So if you go look at the Firebase core,
one thing, why do you write a widget test for essentially something which comes from the Firebase? Because the widget
what I'm thinking is it's a widget further down the tree.
The widget test has a very specific, use case, which is.
Yeah. I know exactly a good reason to test this. So this is like, you put this in your.
But should you test it?
No, but you're not testing. No, the key here is he's not trying to test Firebase initialize app. He's trying to test his widget that consumes and uses Firebase initialize app. And of course, what's going to happen is it's going to crash because there's no method channel implementation in his test case for that, right? And that's probably what's
that's
happening.
Not a widget test in isolation. Now you're talking something closer to an integration test.
Because Simon, the widget test is here's my state, here's how my widget should look like. So you should be able to essentially take your widget away, just drop whatever it is, and does the screen matches essentially all the asserts I'm putting in it. This is what the widget test is for.
Yeah. But what I'm trying to say is, let's say you've got a splash screen on your app, and it's initializing Firebase on a splash screen, right? The question is, that initialization is happening within, in his case, happening within the widget, right? What you're suggesting is that can be an external class that's running that, and therefore you swap out the class and you don't have it. You can run your widget test without Firebase, right? Being connected.
No, so the thing is that your test that essentially, your widget you're testing should not have a need for essentially initialization for Firebase to be pumped.
What I just said.
Because you should. Yeah, because you should have essentially mock data that you're going to provide instead of Firebase.
Yeah, and it's if you needed async, then just go ahead and use return it after 2 seconds or something with a, with a mock response.
This was a case where Swab had me completely convinced because I'm thinking I always run, initialize app in my, in my main, not in a widget itself anyway. Yeah. But if you're wanting to display the splash screen and not, and wanting to get all that done and you're wanting to do this, then that splash screen has a dependency on this, then doesn't it? What Simon said.
I was going to say the point here is that the key point here is when you build let's say give the splash screen example, is it that your splash screen is directly calling this code and depending on it, or does it call a function in some class which calls this? Because then you mock that object coming in and you do your delay or you do your simulation of it to occur. You can also say throw Firebase exception and validate that if an error is thrown during initialization that the splash screen shows or acts appropriately to reset the app state or to do whatever it needs to do. Anyway, but in short, if you want to test fully, and do more like an integration test and validate that this works, then if you go look at the Firebase core package, it has test cases for this. And basically what you do is you do Firebase app platform.instance, and you can set your own test handler basically and report that it's always okay. Never goes to the network. It never actually does anything. It just fakes the response basically.
I think Robert is just trying to. I think Robert's just trying to mess with us here.
Yeah.
Integration with widget tests. What?
Anyway.
All right.
I wouldn't do so.
Right. I am a Flutter developer for over 3 years.
Historically, Android had 3 types of tests. There were unit tests, which you can test nothing, just Java code, no views, nothing. Then there came Roboelectric. Wow, that was fun. Essentially, it was running the Java engine on your machine, not on your phone, on your machine, which you're developing, and it was creating quasi-Android environment. You can pump some views and have some context and stuff. And then you have a UI automation, which is like completely separate app, which pokes your app to do stuff, right? These are the free tests.
Do you remember Monkey?
Now, what the widget tests are is this middle Roboelectric thing. You pump your widget. You don't pump entire app. You pump the widget. So you need to provide all the dependencies which are required there. If you hard coded your dependency into some class which, doesn't give you a nice way of mocking, then probably that's a problem with the architecture here, because you shouldn't be having this kind of problem. So this is why, the typical use case would be just get me, this is my current state of my app, provided, riverpoded or whatever, and here's what I see on the screen. Change this, change that, change this, change that, and this is how you write the test for it. Yeah.
Someone's got notification sounds coming through, I think.
Yeah,
I do. It's me.
and they're very loud.
I don't know.
Turn them off.
Danielle, were you going to say something about this, or shall we move on to the next question?
I was going to say one more thing, and I try and figure out how to turn off my stupid notifications. It's Slack. If I quit Slack, that should stop it. All right, there we go. Yeah, because where I used to click for is not doing it now. I don't know why. I don't have the do not disturb part there. I'll figure that out. Anyway, what I was going to say is going back to Simon's point where he said that if you're calling something, you could just mock that class, function in a class, you can just mock that class. What I was going to say is that if you're not doing that and you want to be able to test that, you should set it up something like that so you can mock that class and still get what you want. So you can still make that, so if you're not doing that, that's actually a solution for how you do it is you go ahead and create the class that you could mock. That is what makes the call.
Yeah, Randall is mentioning in the chat that actually, in Riverpod, you can easily substitute your whatever you're doing there.
You can do everything in Riverpod.
But there's the one thing is that when writing tests, if you feel it is bloody hard to write your test, to mock stuff, there's something wrong with the domain for which you're writing the test for. It's like you cannot easily inject essentially mocks and figure out if this function was called. There's something wrong in the architecture of the code you're trying to test, because if you sort your architecture, then writing tests is like, that's a Copilot thing. This should actually auto-generate your tests very quickly.
All right, let's get on the next question here.
Been a Flutter developer for over 3 years. I really want to develop a web application. Do you suggest I start with React.js or Flutter for web front end?
I joined just in time on this.
Jasper.
Just in time.
Go on.
I'd say Jasper.
Yeah. The answer is unless there's a reason not to, you absolutely should use Flutter for web for this, because you already you're bringing all your knowledge from Flutter anyway. So unless you have a financial reason you need to go learn React.js, definitely use Flutter. I've been using it as my product for over a year now, and I've really not run into issues. Now, I will caveat that with I'm not creating a set of pages that need SEO or things like that, and I don't know how I don't know how React.js handles that either. But if you're just talking about building like what would be an app, but for the web, I would definitely say stick with Flutter unless
and I think we need to combine this with the next question. I wish we could put two on the screen at once. But can you give advice or tutorial for using JavaScript with Flutter in order to improve SEO development? Actually, that's not as bad a question as I thought. So as long as you're using Flutter for the embed and not for the whole page.
Yes. Let me explain what the problem. So this has been a topic that's ongoing, and the topic ongoing is search engine optimization, or SEO, and what that means for Flutter. This is nothing new to Flutter specifically. This is a lot of frameworks can have the same problem, and that is Flutter has a not a large footprint, but it has the engine component which has to be downloaded. And in doing so, and then it sort of dynamically renders the page. The page you actually download from the server, the HTML for the page, is actually just one div tag, right? There's no content whatsoever, because when your browser receives that HTML, it runs JavaScript and it inserts the tags at runtime to show the page, right? Now, in the case of Flutter and its canvas kit, it essentially puts a canvas there and paints all the pixels of the canvas. The user has no visual difference to what's going on, but when it comes to search engines, a computer, aka the search bot, requests from the domain name for the index page, and it receives a blank index page. And it goes, now modern, so that's old school search, right? This is like 90s search bots. New search bots actually run a browser. And what they do is they download the page and run it in a browser, and they actually run the JavaScript. They download the JavaScript and they run it for a very small period of time. Now, if your page cannot render enough content visibly in like the DOM for that page to load in this whatever it needs to do, then again, SEO will fail because it cannot get the content to the descriptions and the text and the images to analyze to then rank you on search correctly. And each different search bot does these things differently, right? So Bing will do one thing, Google will do another, and so on and so forth, right? So it's not a Flutter domain specific problem. This is just a web problem in general, because a lot of web is turning into you download your app and then you run the app on the client that is in the browser. So the solution to these problems, a solution to these problems, should I say, is what's called server-side rendering. Server-side rendering is basically you run that same Flutter code that would have been run in the browser, but on the server, and then you return the HTML of the pre-rendered page, so that when it downloads immediately from the server with all the HTML, with all the tags, with all the images, all ready to rock and roll. Slightly differently, of course, on again, depending on what renderer you're using inside Flutter Web, that's the HTML renderer I'm just talking about. If you use the Canvas Kit renderer, it's just the canvas, which still doesn't help. Specifically in the realm of Flutter, it actually produces two sets. It produces the canvas and it produces the semantic tree in tags, which can also help with SEO. But to be honest, the answer to this is Jasper. So we talked about this package before. I'll bring this package up now from pub.dev.
And Jasper really comes in. The difference between using Flutter and Jasper. In Flutter, you want to do a web app as an embed in a web page and do your SEO in the web page, but don't create your whole site or your whole page with Flutter itself. However, Jasper was made for this.
Yeah. So Jasper, he says, package.
I guess they need to make pub dev with Jasper.
Right. So actually, this is so interesting enough, and this is what gets me. I mean, it's not gets me. This is the wrong term, but yeah, you can see here. This is just a web. This is just DOM. Although all of this is actually rendered with Dart, I believe. I mean, there's a lot of Dart that's involved in a lot of the rendering, but it's actually. I think this is still using. I think what this is rendering in. Come on, Swab. What's the framework? AngularJS. I think it's Angular Dart. I think it's Angular Dart still. I have to bear with me.
I was going to say, if it's JS, we got a problem.
Yeah, but anyway, so this Jasper Dart web framework, you write all your web stuff in Dart. It has a very similar feel. So if I run you'll see here, this is how you build like an app, run app, DOM to use components instead of widgets. Same thing. Produces this tag with this text, and you can see here it's running over here. And then if I just jump in and show weather API example here, as you can see, run app, you have a stateful component, it has a state, has a weather API. So all this kind of stuff in its state, it's all very similar. But from build, you return back lists or iterables of components, and this builds up what you see on the right. And you still have to do CSS though, but all your code is done in Dart. And this is probably the more desirable kind of direction you probably want to go in if you have to do a web page that has SEO, because It's more lightweight. That Dart code is converted to JavaScript. It's shipped down to the browser. It will load in a small period of time and get you the SEO that you need.
Mm-hmm. And you
I
notice
remember
it
ages
says
ago
component
that Flex was doing this thing that it was adding to the wrapper page in which Flex was running, was adding essentially all the tags that there will be.
So you're talking about the Flash system, right?
Yeah. Flash was doing this thing, right? So it was essentially, if your content shows this and then that, it would create invisible tags, essentially invisible.
So I'm gonna
HTML page to be searchable for you. Yeah.
So that's what it did back then, and that was fine. Right now, bots look for white text on white background. If it's not visible on the screen, or like the CSS somehow makes it not visible, it moves it off the screen, it is considered bad form, and you'll be marked down by the bots because you're trying to hide content and from the bots, and essentially you're faking it, right? So it's about people putting up keywords and hiding them and trying to get their stats up on the SEO and all this kind of stuff. They're trying to trick the search bots. So anything like that you do is going to get you marked down. Don't do it. First of all,
this is in Flash, right?
It's going
to this was done ages, and this was like auto-generated. So if you
very punny,
project,
Chris,
it would essentially generate this in a wrapper.
So Flex. So those that don't know what we're talking about is Flash used to be, I say the precursor to Flutter. I don't know, but basically in the web you could have an embed which was an animated, vector animated interaction. Now they did a UI toolkit called Flex, Adobe Flex, and that meant you could like put buttons and have drop down menus and stuff for doing things. And that whole system, again, because none of the stuff you did there was actually, it's all self-contained, a bit like Flutter, nothing on the outside was seen above that content. So it would render it in HTML on the outside so it was seen by search bots. Anyway.
Remember ActionScript 1, I was a certified Flash MX developer.
Oh, God. Run away. All right. Next question. Right. James Johnson says, how's the RISC-V stuff going? Yeah, I mean, like I've got a whole box of RISC-V goodies right here.
I'm waiting for my other dev kit to arrive. It's apparently lost in transit.
Fun gadgets.
Yeah, that.
Yeah. Anyway, so we're still getting there. I've been quite busy as of recent, so it hasn't gone further since last week. But the aim is to. So we can compile Dart. I haven't done that yet, but I know we can compile the Dart SDK. It comes pre-compiled RISC-V from the dev branch of Dart Lang. You can, if you're interested, go download that from the releases page on the Dart website. However, the OSs that I'm running at the moment don't have the same libraries it was compiled with, so I need to recompile it particularly for these platforms. However, running Dart code is one thing. Running Flutter is another, and we'll be doing a custom version of the embedder to output directly to the GPU on, or do it CPU software rendered on these things to output to a display, and that's what we're going to be aiming for.
Yeah.
All right, moving on.
All right, let's say I have a provider and it deals with login. It does all the necessary functions and throws an error. How do I handle that in the main display widget?
I mean, this is kind of a standard sort of architecture thing. It's kind of what we spoke about earlier at the very beginning, right? The point here is that, if your login throws an exception, some point you need to catch that exception. If you don't catch that exception, it's an uncaught exception. It will blow up in your face. Now, if it's part of the UI, let's say stream, I think it's not stream build. If it's part of the UI, you normally get like a red error box in debug, and then the error widget will be replaced with a gray screen of doom when it's in release. You don't want that. So normally the idea here is to catch that exception with surrounding your await whatever server code with a try catch, and then you can then choose to return a object, a class that represents your error. That could be an exception, or you could throw another specific type of exception that you want to catch further down. But how to handle the main display, I mean, that's just you receive your result and then you change your display. I'm going to display this widget that says an error occurred, or I'm going to pop up. You could use Scaffold Messenger and pop up with like a little Slack bar that says, sorry, can't connect to server. Try again, little action button. I mean, there's a ton of ways of displaying that. Your question really doesn't provide anything more than like a vague answer like that. I don't.
Well, okay, but to me, what it sounds like is you got a screen where maybe it pops up a login, where you enter your username and your password. Okay,
yeah.
And I'm just guessing it's based on the way he says main display widget, is that you'd want to get rid of that screen and then display an error on the the main screen there somehow. That's what I'm getting out of what he said.
Yeah.
But and that's doable in several ways too. But
so I'll give an example of how you might do this, right? So you press your login button to take what's in the input boxes, and then that'll do some future, and then in the rest you can do a catch exception in there, and then inside that catch you can then do if mounted, set state, and return your error object. And then when the build function happens again, you say if error is not null, then show this lovely sort of red box on the screen with the text, sorry, can't log in, or you can extract out the type of message you want to display to the user, like incorrect username or password or whatever, right? There's a ton of ways of doing that, right? And
it's again about designing the architecture of the view, how you're handling the state and what is the state for you. Because if the error happens because physically you cannot reach the login server, for example, this means that you have a timeout, and that's an exception which will be called by a HTTP client somewhere. And now what I do with this? So when this happens, I set a state HTTP exception. I cannot log in. Try later. Or if the answer is wrong credentials, right? The response is essentially 404 not authorized, whatever. Then if you see this exception, you set your state to wrong credentials, and then your view reflects on this state and presents specific time. A specific view for it.
On a side note, just to error handling here, just something I just thought of, and something that has come up before. So this is slightly off topic here, but an interesting point is don't just take you shouldn't normally just take the error message that's sent back from the server and display it. So first of all, it can contain private internal functional information. You shouldn't be sending that anyway, but it can potentially contain that. Normally, your server would send back an error code, i.e. be a little identity string, error user not found, something like that. That's specific, and then you detect that in the app and then display from your localizations. So inside your app, you've got like your in French, English, whatever languages, you've got that error message to display to the user. Another way of handling this, because those errors can maybe change on the fly, or you don't really want to have to code them into the app, is in your request you send a accept language header. And accept language header on this HTTP, but you can send what language the user is using in your app, French, English, or so on. And then the server can respond with a localized version of the error message to be displayed to the user. And that's the way you handle errors back from the API would then contain code, maybe some details that are technical that you might need for debugging, and then display, and that's what you show the user. And in doing that, you've got localization and you've got a definite, like, this is text to be displayed to the user. But there's lots of ways of handling these things, and there's no one way to one ring to rule them all, as they say. But once you get a mechanism that works, just abstract it out and keep it the same across your product, because you're going, oh god, more 3D printing. Anyway, you're going to need to handle that properly and keep it simple, right, straightforward.
And one thing I've seen people do, because sometimes the HTML code is repeated on something, I've seen them actually test the error message part that came back. That's also very fraught with danger, because that means if the backend makes a change to anything on that, your front end is now somewhat broken because it's not going to show the right errors. So I would warn against doing that. So the idea of the language is great, but
yeah, normally you would be in control of your front end and back end and have them in sync in some sort of fashion. but things happen. All right, moving on.
Is it a big? It is a big hassle to convert mobile to web. Proposal: making plugins support web with empty implementations. For now, this is plugins, not framework.
Right.
Because I was thinking framework at first.
I'm gonna slap this guy with a big like stamp of disapproval here. I get what you're saying, but can I also mention that you can do that? Literally, the whole plugin architecture is called federated for a reason. You literally run one line and you can override it with a blank implementation in your web compiled product. You do not need the authors of plugins to do this. That is completely up to you, and it's a simple change to make. So what you need to do is go look up conditional imports, conditional imports. And basically you can say if it's the HTML the HTML library is available, then include this blank implementation, and then the setup function or whatever will set the federated plugin platform interface to being that blank one. So when the Flutter plugins code that you've got in your app goes to do it, it'll return back an empty list because that works for your use case in your application, right? It's there for a reason. It's built like that.
I also disagree because if you do that, then you've got no clue whether it was a plugin you needed or not, and that could be a testing nightmare later. If you've got, if stuff looks like it's working, it compiles fine, everything sort of runs okay, but now it's failing because you're expecting something that's not there. So what I would agree with what Simon just said in that be very purposeful about it. So if you want to, if you want to, like something like contacts, if you want to do something empty, great. But don't just make all of them that way, because I think that's asking for disaster.
There's also to say that the conditional imports can be used. So it works into the tree shaking nature of Dart. So if you've got like widgets and things that are separate from web to mobile, you can do that in one package, no problem. I think the problem you get is when you've got like it's because again it's only the imports are what's followed when it builds, so therefore it doesn't matter if you've got like lots of web specific packages in your pub spec. They're not going to be built into your final product because you're not referencing them, or in your mobile app, and vice versa, right? So your web product's not going to include the mobile stuff, and that's all about how you build your product. However, there is another way of doing this, and a lot of other projects, I've seen projects like this in Flutter as well, is that you do like a monorepo. You have 3 packages. You have your common package, and then you have a web package and a mobile package, and both your web and your mobile package import the common one. So this way you've got web specific in one package, you've got mobile specific in the other, but they can all share common, which can have all your widgets and all your common screens and everything else in that the other 2 packages share. So this allows you to kind of split things off. It all can also speed up your build process when you might have a lot of dependencies. You might have a lot of stuff going on. It can help to split your project up.
And one more thing on there, just on the specific example he gave, with the saying, or should you keep using K as web? You should probably be using something like you should be using something like K as web anyway, because you don't. I mean, if it's loading contacts, if that is not something you can do on the web, then you probably would either rather not show the button at all, or at least show it disabled. If you want to keep the space there for it, you should show it disabled. So that's not that's not something that would be solved by the problem. So I think that particular example, you definitely need to know whether or not it's available or not, so that you can properly have your UI work.
I mean, like as we said, the original question was like having the plugin interface itself being reported back as empty. Well, probably the point here is that the user going, well, why is it not getting my contacts? They're pressing on this button, why is it not working? When really the answer is use K as web to hide the button, or to change the approach that the app takes to doing whatever the feature is, so that it works better as to the end user in terms of UX, user experience on web. Right, moving on.
I'm just looking rather confused. I won't bring it up. I've still got my IntelliJ up with that Copilot suggestion. It misspelled rotate.
Yeah.
How can you
misspell
rotate?
I'm going to tell you what happened. I'm going to tell you what happened there. Scott misspelled it somewhere else in his code, and it found it and replicated it.
Yeah, I'm sure that.
Nope, because I don't have any
It's somewhere it's misspelled. Anyway, right. Is there any news related to Flutter and Dart Flutter? I've not been looking.
I haven't heard anything.
This is a boomerang question which comes every week.
There was news a month ago.
Not the Flutter team.
It was a week ago.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, none of us work for Google. None of us are part of the Flutter team. This is all.
They
community.
send us cool shirts.
Yes, indeed.
That's about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
There you are. Nice.
There you go.
So I know that they have been working hard on it, and the best thing I would say is go look up the 3.7 release notes, follow the issues and related tickets and so on, and you'll see what's going on. If you're really interested, so something that we say every week, and I will just reiterate here briefly, and that is Flutter is open source. Flutter is developed in the open source arena. Everything they're working on is there on GitHub. You can go look at it. You can go comment on it. You can go contribute to it. So, it's great.
If you have time,
go
crawl
hit
through the code.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we get certain repeat questions all the time, and the answer is usually, if you find out, let me know.
Right.
So
next question.
All right. How can I show a property next to the widget without having to go to the details inspector tab using debug fill properties, similar to what text widget does?
How can I? So you want to show it in app on the screen? Is that what you're trying to?
In app or in code? I'm thinking that this is more like when you do debug and you hit a breakpoint, and it shows the values to the right of the items. Is that what they mean?
I mean, like it's saying, how can I show a property next to? I think maybe show the property next to it in the code. I mean, the whole idea of having the inspector is that you can see the live fill, like you said with debug fill properties. You see them in the tree, you click on them, and it highlights the code. So they are actually linked. If they're not highlighting and they're not matching up, there's actually a setting in the plugins to make them link up. So maybe that. Oh,
all right. I am going to hit this next one. What's up? Although Randall's interrupting us here. What's up?
Yes, I was just going to say that Remy has been putting, again, Riverpod is half my life apparently, but Remy has been putting in hooks so that the various properties of the providers and things like that and the consumers show up in DevTools. So there are hooks for an author of a widget to actually provide information to DevTools, which can then show up as you're inspecting that widget in the tree. So yes, there are ways to do that. Text apparently already does that. I haven't seen that yet, but there are ways for any widget to say, here's some debug information about me in DevTools. Those will be revealed.
It's basically, if you're using any widget, even your own like screens and everything, you can just override debug field properties and add your own properties. It's very helpful for debugging, and everyone should do it. There you go. Yeah, sure.
Very cool. All righty. Why does not the Flutter SDK not have a state management tool? Here's an interesting thought on this. Hang on. You've had your go to the bathroom. Go away for a while. Here's the thing. Okay, a state management tool is an abstraction layer to make your life easier when dealing with state. So peel back the onion for a minute. If you look at Flutter, it does have a state management system. It's based on inherited widget. Okay. Now, if you don't think that counts as a way to do state management, peel back the onion and see what's happening underneath of inherited widget and realize that inherited widget is putting a layer of abstraction there in order to make your life easier. But what you're talking about is, why does the framework not put another layer on top of that? And really, the answer to it is the framework is trying to be minimalistic. They do not have a huge number of people and even if the Flutter team was doing nothing but code reviews and pushing, they still wouldn't have a whole lot of people. They still wouldn't want to put this in there, not in the framework itself, because they're trying to keep the framework as simple as possible and let people use those building blocks in composition to build other things. So different state management approaches are needed for different times. The next question coming up from John is about looking at a state management solution that is like Redux. Sometimes you need a Redux-like solution. Sometimes you need a provider-like solution. Sometimes you just want to make a stateful widget near the base of your app, put everything you need in there, and access it through the context or access it through a provider. And so putting one in the SDK, okay, great for the use cases that are good with that one. But what about the rest of the use cases? And if we start putting in a whole bunch of state management solutions, now we've just bloated the SDK and we've got a ton of stuff to maintain. Just keep it simple. Keep different versions of state management as packages.
Yeah, so the framework cannot be opinionated. And if you try to put whatever type of state management, a higher level, there's some kind of get whatever provider, you're going to lose some people behind is that we don't like it. We want to have it other way around. And they will try to circumvent this, make workarounds. So you stay very, very ascetic in this minimal what is in the SDK, and then you do it. Look at the other things which don't go into the main Flutter package. There's plenty of them. It's like if you try to make a pull request to Flutter, can we add this one file to the template? They will say no more files in a template. It's just enough. We cannot. I probably would be good to have more, but essentially it will be too complex and some people won't use it.
Like a package,
just garbage, right? So this is why it stays this way, and it's up to you to figure out which one is the best.
And if a Flutter package doesn't work for something like a Flutter package is not going to work for an app template, but an IntelliJ template or IntelliJ or VS Code plugin might. Right, something that you can use to create a Flutter app with your own template, possibly.
I mean,
so it's been done.
You can see this, when there were questions, can we have a template for this, templates for that, template? They stop and very early, like, okay, this is template for plugin, this is template for package, this is for the app. That's it, done. Now you want to do something fancy? Here's Mason, right? Yeah, use Mason. That's a tool just for making you happy. You can do.
We're completely off topic here,
right? Just don't put it in the SDK. It's complex enough.
I would love to say a little bit more about the question. And so I'm the opposite of Randall. Randall is Riverpod. I went to more of the Matt Carroll school of state management, and you usually don't need these tools. You can do pretty much everything you need to do with what's in Flutter. So, I agree with what Scott said, that Flutter has everything you need. And that if you need to use something else or want to use something else, it's definitely not one size fits all. So that's a reason why you wouldn't want to have only one way. If you want to use block, you want something that's going to help you with block. If you want, but in a lot of cases with the apps that we're building, almost anything is overkill just because you could do it a lot easier and very simple. But that said, if you look a provider, use provider. If you love Riverpod, use Riverpod. And if you want to learn one of them, take a look around.
I will mention that. Hold on. I will mention this. We're going to get off the state management topic in a second. We get every week, but the why Flutter it does have state management. Like the whole point of the framework is to do state management, right? Like the term state management completely overused. And as Scott was saying, we have inherited widget, which is like the base of the tree. You also have inherited model, which has got a video. Again, this is same sort of thing, that you present some update data on a particular piece, and then you can have the sort of the UI update. And then we also have like the entire infrastructure around a lot of stuff is around listable. This is like the foundation class, and everything is either a change notifier, a value notifier, value listable, animations are listable, scroll controls are listable. It all links together. This you can consider as part of state management, right? So there's no need to actually use provider. There's no need to use Riverpod. You can do it all without. In fact, they're all built on top of these things, right? They're all built on top of streams, on top of, inherited widget or anything else built into the framework. So, yes, it is built in. But the point here, though, these state management libraries is to add additional functionality or add an opinionated functionality that make it easier for you and faster for you to build apps.
Not everyone understands that word opinionated. So opinionated is kind of like saying there's a certain preferred way to do things, I guess.
And that's your opinion.
Rather than leaving it up to the developer.
Yeah, it's one person's opinion about how to do state management. And
I suggest, again, which I was suggesting last time, a week ago, watch the video of Philip Kracek talking about state management. I think it was, I don't know, it was 2016 or...
I think...
are you talking about the talk that they did at I/O 19, or you're talking about the one
19, I think. Yeah, because it was state
Philip
management without any framework, then provide... and then provider.
Yes.
So
yes. That was Matt and Philip at 19. I/O 19.
There is a good one. Majid did a DroidCon London, did a talk. He covered like every state management possible, and he actually explained it all, how it all worked, and it just basically is the one talk to all state management. And if you just go look up Majid state management Flutter DroidCon London or whatever, and you'll find it. Anyway, all right, moving on, because otherwise we never got state management. New version of
async Redux, not Redux.
Redux. I think it's maybe Redux. Really?
It's Mark probably named it that on purpose. Marcelo Glassberg has been producing good work. Mark Glassberg is also behind Fast Mutable Collections, by the way.
It's a typo,
as well as others.
I just tried to find it.
People with Redux experience will love this. Now, to give you an idea how far back this goes, Mark was around in alpha, and he and I did a little bit of stuff together, and he was insisting that we use Redux at the time because he had come from somewhere else, and they always used Redux. And Simon and I were looking at this going, Redux was massive overkill for what we were trying to do. And
it's interesting. So his points here in the package is that easy to learn, easy to use, easy to test, has no boilerplate. So that's kind of interesting. And there's a medium story to go and take you on a journey. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. This looks like there's some great documentation here. Lots and lots of documentation to read. So you can't go wrong with examples or how to do something. That is quite some documentation. I'll tell you that.
Mark is a very serious engineer. Formally trained professional engineer, has been since well before he got involved in Flutter, and you can tell by the way he does things.
So my play with Redux ended when you were essentially creating a gazillion of actions, and then you were figuring out, shit, is this action or that action? Because I had to name so many of them that I don't remember which one should I use this moment.
Just the amount of reducers and substates, and just it just gets so overly complicated, and I don't know.
Oh, come on. It doesn't get complicated until you add middleware.
There is a talk on, if someone wants to understand it, right, the basics of it. Was it the guy, the Facebook guy, Byron? I don't remember first name. Or was it his first name? And he was talking about essentially, where this Flux and Redux came from, the unidirectional flow, that this is effectively putting a constraint on developer because we have too much freedom to screw up the architecture and just make it simple that you have a state which is modified by action, then it's reflected.
Redux is great when you have a big team and you want to make sure that one person doesn't reach in and screw everything up. Right, because it's a very limiting system. You have to do things a very specific way, which if it's only 3 people, this is a lot of boilerplate that gets in the way. If you've got 30 people, 20 people working on the same app, it kind of gives you some protection against somebody reaching in and stirring the pot in a way that screws everything up. I guess that's a big reason that it exists. So everything's got its place, including Redux.
I will. Where'd that question go? Crap. Whatever.
I don't know. What'd you do with it? All right. If we're going to do any live coding, do we want to cut it? Do we want to cut questions in live code, or
let's just get your questions in now. If you've got any questions to be answered, there you go.
Yeah,
and we'll be cutting very soon. Right, come.
OAuth 2.1. What was that? There's a Firebase OAuth thing, isn't there?
Yeah, no, OAuth is a standard, right? Like there's new, I'm guessing there's a new standard for 2.1 because 2 has been generally. I've not even seen it, not even heard of it. This is the first time I'm hearing of 2.1. So no, I have no knowledge on implementing it. Anyone else? Time to look up and learn something new, right?
I'm sorry, I'm reading the next question and very confused.
Let's get to it. Sorry, Jobs. Hopefully, how about you come tell us about OAuth 2.1? Let's take it. I have a problem in an API calls result using a model class. If I get null values, the app is getting a null error. How to validate all? I think what we're checking. Okay, the first thing you need to do here is your model is apparently not able to accept a null value and the API is sending one. So maybe set your model up so that it will be able to accept that null value and then handle it. Right. The point here is it doesn't want nulls. So
no, but yeah, don't use it.
No, you can try catch it.
Don't let it crash you.
Just try catch it.
Which is basically what I just said in a way. But
well, I'm just saying you try catching if you get the trying to set a field as null or whatever. I can't remember what the exception is now.
There you go.
You're muted. You're muted, Danielle.
I wonder. Who's this Flutterfly person?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Hey, everybody. This actually doesn't quite solve the problem. The field has to be nullable, but this will keep it from putting it. Like if you're. This is actually when you're going to JSON. So this is actually the wrong way. So that's actually not really a good answer. That's actually when you're doing to JSON, whether it includes it or not. So never mind on that. That's actually the other way around. One problem I was going to say with just try catching it and letting it fail is that you don't get anything back then. So if you make all the fields nullable in there, then null fields won't stop you, but that doesn't mean that you got valid JSON back for what you care about.
It all depends on what you're trying to do. But if the server, like the thing is, you have to be. I can tell you this right now, and it's so not done by people, and it really frustrates me when I see this. And that is proper error handling on those situations. It's completely valid for you to get messed up data over the network. I can tell you this right now. What's going to happen is the user gets their network goes offline, or they connect to a open Wi-Fi that has a what do they call it? A captive Wi-Fi login. Means that all the web pages that are returned on the Wi-Fi login means that your app suddenly gets HTML instead of JSON in the response to its request, and boom, it blows up. Right? Like the point here is you need to be able to handle any messed up data from that's coming from the server. It may not even be coming from your server, in which case you need to handle that appropriately and manage it correctly. If you're getting nulls, so just in this case, this user, which was about how to validate all your fields. Yeah, if you're getting null values, then you're catching the fact that they should not be null. That is validation. You validated it by catching that exception. The other side of this is you can make your fields nullable and then check to see if they are null, and then you're validating them, right? But again, it's how you handle that in your model deserialization, right?
Yeah, there are several ways, and also if you want to become a super expert in how to handle data that comes in forms you didn't expect or in the wrong form, go work with COBOL. I don't recommend that. Go work with COBOL.
On that note, I can't stand this anymore. On that note, I think I've got to go.
We got one question left. Come on, you can make it.
I can wait for the last question. Yeah, my sprint planning got moved, so that was one of those notifications you guys were all hearing. So,
well, here we go. How's the 3D stuff going? Are we doing VR in Flutter yet?
So you've always been able to do this kind of thing in Flutter, right? Like.
Well, and James is asking, "Are we there yet? Are we there yet?"
Sorry?
James is asking, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet?
No, but the point here is that, you've always been able to do 3D, and you can go, if you wanted to go do VR in Flutter, you can do that via Unity, for example. You go use the Unity plugin and boom, you've got that
You
working.
don't need to. You just need to render 2 scenes, right? On your phone and put a cardboard on your mobile phone, and you have a VR. That's it. Thank you very much.
Oh,
mission
man.
accomplished.
Well,
Who still has the cardboard VR boxes in the house? Just be honest. How many of you still have it?
Before people get a little bit too crazy, Simon said you could always do VR. Yeah, if you had the skills to get way down into the render engine. I'm sorry, not VR. We've always been able to do 3D. If you have the skills to reach down into the render engine and you understand how all that's supposed to work, there are a number of ways to do it. And one of the most impressive, actually, I saw is that ocean simulation. Who did the ocean simulation with the shade? They're using shaders, but it looks
the ocean simulation. The ocean simulation was already a shader, and it's just been used on Flutter.
Okay, I thought they were calculating it in the shader.
No, it is. No, don't get me wrong. The ocean is being calculated in the shader, right? But that was a Wolf. But no, he didn't make the shader. It was already made. So if you go to shadertoy.com, you'll find a bunch of them on there. Anyway.
Okay, it is now half past the hour, and I think Danielle is turning into a pumpkin.
Yeah. See you, Danielle.
I am. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for hanging out.
Next week.
Thank you for coming.
Of course.
I will mention that. Welcome, Randall. I will mention that I popped this in the chat. This answers James' question directly. I just popped a link to my talk I gave at Flutter Global Summit a couple of weeks ago, where I explained doing 3D. I gave an example of doing 3D, like complete rendering yourself in Flutter and not using, any external libraries at all, and how you do all that. So you can go look at it if you want. But yeah, if you want to go do this stuff, like there's Flutter GL, there's a bunch of packages, and I do explain it there. We now have Impeller. Mm-hmm. And let me just see if I can quickly find the example I have. I'm sure I have an example around here somewhere. So basically, in upcoming Flutter framework, they're working on this right now. Impeller is a new rendering engine, and Impeller offers I'll pop this up on stream since. Yeah, let's see if this comes up. Let's see. Off the cuff, let's go. See if this works. We getting that? Yeah, okay.
Yep.
So this is a video I took from a Apple iPad, and this is Impeller rendering the 3D reconstruction of Wipeout that I've been building. So this is all rendered in Flutter, in Flutter's rendering engine, in Impeller, on iOS.
That brings back memories, I tell you.
So there you go. So yes, it's all possible, and there's no reason why you couldn't do this. Is what you call a scene, and there's no reason why you couldn't do 2 scenes next to each other at slightly different positions, and therefore you get your stereoscopic view, a la VR, magical. You're all done. There you go. Simple, right? Anyway, so soon we'll have some cool stuff. How's that? Right. Let's move on before you get crazy. Right.
All right.
Is it going to be possible to create home screen widgets using only Flutter without coding in any native language?
No. Now think about this question. Think about it. Flutter is running inside of an Android activity, right? Flutter is an app. What you're talking about by doing a home screen widget is putting something outside the app into the operating system's home screen. So to be able to do that with, you might be able to use a package such as Mark, what's his face? I don't know what you're talking about. I thought.
All I can tell you is I did a terrible talk on this because it all went wrong. I've actually done some code on this and made it work. So basically, yes, you can do this, but you're still going to be coding with the native language, right? Because you're using the native components of Android or Windows or whatever the host operating system is to display that content, right? So the point here is, if there's a plugin available, then you can just go. I think there is a plugin now actually for in pub.dev for home screen widgets on Android in Flutter. And the way I actually had that working, I think it's the same way the plugin actually does it, is that it captures what's rendering on a Flutter view to an image, and that's displayed in what's called an image view on your desktop in Android. And that's the only way to have custom rendering. And this is what all these other apps do. Like if you want like custom graphics and stuff, because of the way that the hosted widget environment works for desktop widgets, is that it's just an image basically. But you can do it. You can build home screen widgets with Flutter. There's packages out there for that. I can't remember the name of it though. Probably home screen widgets Flutter or something.
Yeah, something obvious.
Home widget, is that it? That's the one. That sounds like the
home
one.
widget.
Am I back?
Yeah, if you ever went anywhere, didn't even know you went anywhere. So
Yeah, the internet connection dropped here.
Oh, wow.
Sorry, I just thought you were sitting really still.
Yeah.
So it looks like I just had a quick look. I think this was the package. Don't quote me on this, but I'll get this up on the stream here. Home widget. I think this is the one. Let me pop this in the chat for everyone. This looks like it. There you go. So Flutter rendering in widgets on both Android and iOS. And here's an example of it's all you need to do. I don't know, when you click on stuff, how you receive it. But there is
all you need to do is probably a understatement of some kind.
Save widget, update widget, background click. I'm sure you can read how to do the various things. I don't know. I'm not going to go into it, but yeah, it looks like you can do all that. So that's fun.
You're not going to live code one of those right now? You should do that.
No, I should not do that. So yes.
Cool.
Right. I think that's all the questions we got in the queue. Yeah.
Yes.
How about that? We got through them all.
Unless you have a question about what Simon is about to start doing right now, whatever that is.
I was thinking I could. People interested in live coding, I can certainly present some stuff.
Yes, we should do that. We like watching you type.
What does anyone want to see? So I can show what I've been working on recently. If people are interested, and I haven't finished it, I could work on it a bit more, I guess.
Sure.
Let me see what I can bring up here. Bear with.
I could spend 30 seconds talking about Code Labs while you're trying to figure out what you want to do, or CodePad.
Sure.
So I just released my first Mason brick, and we talked about Mason earlier in the show. I think Swile did that, talked about it. And it's basically a way of building things that you can reuse, mix components, things like that. Well, I had this little script that I would called dplay and fplay that would fire up a project with a random name, either set up for Dart or set up for Flutter. So Dart create or Flutter create, and then open up VS Code, which is what my favorite text editor is, and write in it. And it's basically been a replacement for the last year of, instead of using Dartpad all the time for a scratch area to just kind of noodle something out. And the advantage is you're in a full text editor now. You're in a full IDE. And you can add whatever packages you want. You're not limited to the ones that are good for web and on the short list of things that Dartpad allows. And it's already a project on your disk, so you can move it into a permanent place. I put them in /temp by default, but you can move it into a permanent place, and that's the beginning of a project for you. And it puts all my favorite packages in. So if you're a Mason user and a VS Code user, I would check out CodePad. That's easily findable in the Brickyard.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to make things really, really big, aren't I? That's what I'm going to have to do. All right. Well, let's see if this comes through. Yeah, people are going to have to keep an eye on the chat. See what I can do here. This will probably have to be even bigger and bigger. I think it's about as big as you're going to get. So, yeah. So, what you see? Let me turn on debugging here. Okay. So, actually, I'm going to change that. Right, so I'll walk you through the code first of all. Oh, I'll show you it actually. So what you see on the left here is a little custom tile rendering widget. And as you can see, you can pan around the widget and you get essentially an infinite series of tile. You can fling it in either direction. You can pinch. You can. Oh, he says if I. Let's get back. I can. Oh, hot reloaded. Hot reloaded. Come on. There we go. And if I use my fingers here, I can pinch to zoom and pan that around and all that kind of usual stuff, right? Okay, cool. So there you go. This is what you're seeing here. And I'll show you what I've done. And this is all completely custom elements, render objects, all that kind of fun stuff. I haven't finished it yet, but I'll take you through what we got here. So at the start, so I've got home screen here as an example, and home screen. This is essentially the example app here above. We create a tile controller, we dispose of our tile controller, and we create a tile widget with that controller, and then a builder, which will return back a widget for each tile. And based on this position, you could return back whatever you want. So tile of a map or do whatever you want, right? I should be eventually adding a scale factor or a Z coordinate, which would let you change the tiles based on zoom, maybe do subdivisions. There's all sorts of fun things we can do, but I'm just going to get the basic one working right now. Is the code legible enough for everyone? Should I just present? Is that any better? Sorry. Tell me if you can't see anything or if it's a problem, but we'll work through it. So tile controller, so tile widget hosts the gesture detectors and a tile viewport. Straightforward. And this just hooks up the various inputs with the controller that control the viewport. Our controller is a change notifier. Again, there's no, literally this is all just inbuilt into Flutter. There's no packages here. There's no nothing. This is just plain old Flutter. So we get initial position, some bounds, in this case infinity, but we could bound it to particular dimensions on the X and Y plane. The size of individual tiles we can control, and the minimum maximum scales we can also control. So and these are all inputs into the tile controller here. The tile controller literally runs two values, right? And those two values are this origin and scale. That's the only things we care about, which is position and size, essentially. And we control our flinging and our animation. So I can click and fling slowly and fast and all the rest of it. That's just done with these two controls. We've got one for horizontal, one for vertical. Their initial position is based off of what's come in, and they're also bounded to the bounds, and they're linked up to the vsync ticker. And we listen to their changes, and when they change, we get this callback on animation tick. It's just storage for the local variables. And when on animation tick, so this is when those animation controls change, it creates a new origin offset based on their values and notifies the listeners that the position has changed. And finally, we dispose of those animation controllers once we're done with this controller. Now we get the fun stuff of input. So on pointer down, we stop our controller. So immediately, if you're fling and you click, it stops, which is what you want. On scale start, we record out. Essentially, this is recording the start origin, or the difference between the current origin and the focal point of the mouse on the screen. So this way, we're not dragging from 0 to 0 on the top left. We're dragging relative to the mouse position. And scale. And essentially here, scale updates is what's called when we pan or pinch to zoom. So if I pinch, we're getting an update. that red box is sort of position 0. And basically what we're doing is we calculate a new origin. If it's different from the current one, then we updated it. Same with scale. Scale relies on 2 fingers being pressed, and this way, if you have 1 finger, we don't get a jump in the focal point. And then notify listeners again if either of these values changes. And finally, on scale end, we check to see if the velocity has in the Y and the X has reached greater than the minimum velocity, and then we animate our controller based on that velocity. And that gets us a way forward to having this kind of fling behavior, right? It's pretty straightforward.
So Simon, as I'm looking at your code, the mathematician in me, which unfortunately is very undertrained, but the mathematician in me says you've got all these X and Y parallel equations. And I'm wondering, could you have done this by tweening on points instead of tweening on X and Y separately?
So I see what you're saying. So first of all, there's no tween going on because these are all done with simulations. So there's no a tween and simulation at the same level. They are separate to cover the animation framework. A tween is I have this particular start point, I have this particular ending point, and I want you to linear interpolate between these two.
Right. Well, the animation controller is doing that, though, isn't it?
No, it's not. No. So the animation controller is going from 0 to 1, sure, or in this case between the minimum and maximum bound. But it's the fact that we're saying animate with a simulation. The simulation in this case simulates a spring and a bunch of coefficients and drag.
Okay.
And in that sort of physics simulation, that's done with animate with, and it has a different binding to the controller. So we don't use tweens for this. However, we could create tweens off the back of these controllers, but we don't need to. We could just control in the value directly. We don't.
Yeah.
So
okay.
We could add, if we wanted to, we could create a tween with a curve of bounce, and then all my movements would bounce around. But I don't want that. We just want direct simulation to screen response.
Right. We have a question from the chat that's useful here.
Yeah. How do you get the greater than or equal to render that in the IDE? Readability plus. Yes. So inside your IDE settings, this is probably going to be teeny tiny on the screen. I did change my font size, so apologies. If you search your font, so I think it's editor general font. So editor font. You'll see a little tick box saying enable ligatures. Ligatures are connections between fonts. So if I turn that off and hit apply, you'll see the 2 separate ones now. And then turn on ligatures and apply, and they join up. Now, this is only if your font supports ligatures. In this case, I'm using FIRA code, FIRA code. There's plenty of other fonts related to coding that supports ligatures. And in the preview here, you'll see what ligatures look like on various things and so on. So yeah, have fun with that. Okay. And briefly, the tolerance is how the spring simulations work inside of Dart. This is copied from the framework, and this is what they recommended for the fling stuff. So I've just copied it in right now. All right, so that's controller. That's how we control our viewport. Well, how do we render our viewport? How do we build it? So in this case, I've got a so I'm trying to work to the top so there's room on the screen for everyone. So I created a tile builder function alias at the top there, just to make life easier. And this tile viewport extends render object widget. Render object widget is the base widget for all sort of rendering on the screen. Everything eventually anything that renders on the screen eventually gets to this. And I decided to make a custom element because I want to control its children. And the only thing that render object widget it asks you to implement is create render object, where you create your own render object to return it. In this case, I pass across the controller to the render object. Also, if this widget gets updated, let's say it gets reparented in the tree, however you want to deal with widgets, then update render object will be called, and then I want to update that controller variable that we've passed in to the existing render object. Now, this is to be clear. Widgets are declarative by nature. Render objects will outlive widgets, right? They are persistent, right? So that's why we have this notion of create and update. So even though you get a new widget, even though you get a new configuration, you're updating the state of your render object that always exists and is cached by the system. Okay. All right. And then inside my render object, I'm using this notion of a tile slot in column and row to sort of distinguish where a tile is on the screen. A view is attached to the screen, should I say, in the grid. So there's 3 trees. I mean, you can go look this up. There's plenty of videos and documentation about the 3 trees of Flutter. Basically, you have your widget tree, which provides configuration. You have your element tree, which builds the relationship and maintains the relationship between widgets and render objects. And then we have the render objects, which actually do the painting and input and hit testing and all the usual stuff that you think of, right? This works out so that you can have your UI as using a sort of declarative approach, and then also get the performance enhancements of diffing and keeping those render objects around, so you don't have to keep rebuilding them, re-rendering them, and so on. Anyway, so what we see here is we've got an element. I override the 2 getters. These are predominantly the 2 getters. This is how an element knows which widget it's connected to and which render object it's connected to, as I said. And in this case, I'm overriding with typing. This way, we're enforcing that this element has to be used with this type of widget and tile. What I have not done yet, and this is what I was working towards right now, is implementing the children. So the idea here is that each of the children of this viewport widget is going to be linked to a slot, and that's a tile slot, and this will be the child element that represents that child object. This is how you have to implement visit children when you have multiple children. The framework can navigate the tree appropriately. And then when we mount a child, in this case, sorry, when this widget gets mounted, that's the viewport, I want to change something in the render object. And when we get unmounted, that is removed from the widget, from the render tree. I want to null that out. This is so I can do layout as we render. I want to do layouts. Let me be clear. Sorry, not be clear. As we do layout, this is the same as layout build. As I do layout, I want it to build widgets, right? So as we do layout the screen, as we move around, I want it to build the widgets as they come into the screen, and that's the reason why I'm using this layout callback. And eventually, it gets to this point here. And this will give me the constraints of my viewport, and then I'll be able to use a build scope to essentially build and attach widgets to this element. So there's a couple of interesting things. When we get asked to forget a child element, we need to remove it from our list, obviously. That's how we get rid of it. And then when this viewport updates a child render object, it will this is how the framework works. Of course, insert render object child, move render object child when it's reparented, and remove. And again, this is passed at the moment, and we'll handle them appropriately in our lists. That is the element, right? So the element is just to maintain the tree of children, basically. Then when it comes to the render box, this is what we're going to look at now. Each child of a render box, of a custom render object, will be asked to give what's called parent data. This is essentially the data that you want to attach to each child of your render object. In this case, I want each child to have a transform layer. This is how I position and move it on the screen. Slightly more efficient, and this is the same thing as like a list view has a parameter add repaint boundaries. That adds like these repaint boundaries. We'll give it a go. I haven't done any testing on this yet. I believe this will be more efficient. And then each one is given a slot. This isn't particularly necessary now. I've been changing a few things. Finally, the viewport. This is the persisted point part of our widget, our viewport widget. That's this scrolling widget here. Is that we pass in this controller, and we have a getter and setter on this controller member. This is what that update render object above. So we'll scroll back up. You'll see that being called here in update render objects, and also what's passed in here in the constructor. And basically, when we set a new value, if it's not the same as the current one we've got, then we want to change something. If our render object is currently attached to the hierarchy, then we need to remove the previous controller's listener set our new value, and then if we're still attached, if we attach the hierarchy, we want to add a listener. This is so that whilst our render object is attached to the render hierarchy, the render tree, it will be listening to the controller. And when the controller does that, notify listeners, our render object will call mark needs layout, and we'll see that change on the screen. So this is kind of how we link up the change of the controller to the repainting on the screen. And then again, same of the thing for the layout callback here. We have a setter. And then again, we maintain our children render objects. Now, strictly speaking, you don't need to do this, right? Like the framework will do this. You can attach children without there being any sort of special thing. I'll show you what that is down here. This is our own list. The framework has its own list of render objects. This is our one, so we can maintain our own relationship. I'll go into it a bit more in a second. This function setup parent data is what's called when a child widget is mounted to your render object. Sorry, a child render object is mounted to this render object. And it always basically says if the current parent data is not tile rendered down, make sure it's set to tile rendered. So if it's null, it will still get set. And this is to make sure that every one of our children has a parent data attached to it. Sorry.
How many layers of this is something like if I just built something using custom paint and custom painter? How many layers between that and stuff that like you're writing? Because it looks like you're sort of really down in the guts of what ultimately custom paint and custom painter have to call, right?
So in fact, yeah, I mean, we can go look at that in a second, actually. So just remind me, let me finish this explanation off the bottom of this code, and then we'll go take a look and you'll see the comparison. And I think that'll help people understand this a bit better.
Cool, thank you.
So again, when this viewport gets attached to the view hierarchy, because there's attached method, this is to the pipeline owner. This is like your root view. Again, we start listening, we get detach, we remove listening. This just maintains that listening relationship between the controller and the render object. Now, these are those three functions I was telling you about earlier. So when we get a child gets added to us, that we correctly attach that child to ourselves. Now, this is all my own state management, essentially. This is all management of my own state that I want to keep. The only two things that actually we cared about by the framework is adopt child and drop child. And these actually can be called directly from the element, and that's how they're normally called. And inside adopt child, this is where the framework actually does that setup parent data we just saw, and eventually it gets added to the abstract node tree. And this is like the underlying hierarchy of how the multiple trees work.
Cool.
I've been waving at you for a little while, Simon. I got to get.
All right.
So
have fun.
See you, Scott. See you next week.
All right. Take care. Yep. And
cool.
I will see you all next week.
Cool. See you then.
So effectively, Simon, you've rebuilt recycle view.
Well, yeah, but I mean, like the point here is that this is how any child works, right? With multiple children, right? In this case, I want something that's going to be able to keep. So in this case, when I drop a view into 1.1, I want that to be reused. When I move around, I just want it to lay, not even called layout, really. I just want it to move the rendering of that object, the layer that's on, to a new position, right? And then any widgets that go off the screen, again, get recycled. Any widgets coming on are going to be built, right? But it's happening in an XY dimensional fashion, right? And then on top of that, if we, press the wrong buttons. And again, when I zoom in and zoom out, we will also want to do a similar thing, right? As more tiles are shown, they get built, and as tiles leave the screen when we zoom in, they get recycled. So yeah, anyway, the point here is that and drop child essentially does the same thing, that eventually just removes itself from that, detaches itself from the hierarchy and removes that abstract node by saying it's parent to null. Anyway, so that is like the child render tree, and basically what you see on the left here, I do at the moment layout. That doesn't do anything. It just sizes itself to the parent, and we're going to invoke that to make these tiles. This is debug paint, by the way. Just to be clear, that's all we paint right now. And debug paint turned on, I overlay the grid and the tiles for debugging purposes. And as you can see down here, when we go to paint, I do layout tiles, and what I will be doing is very much what this is. The idea being that we set the offset of our parent data, and then push a transform layer with the current transformation scale of the child, and then paint that child at that new position. This is how we will be doing it for the moment. For debugging, if we're drawing the tiles and we're column row 0, I just draw a red box on the screen. So that's what you see here as a debugging facility. And then our debug paint is very similar. If we have our debug paint size enabled, which is this in the editor, that's this high debug paint borders and all this kind of fun stuff. If that's enabled in debug paint, then this will create a painter, lay out the tiles, and then draw the rectangles and text in the center of each one of the tiles. Just for debug purposes. And then our little layout algorithm is this. It's not too complicated. It just rounds to the nearest tile size essentially, and then accounts for accounts for it appropriately. Yeah, that's it there. Anyway, not magical,
but the way you're structuring is essentially it's a one view and a gazillion of children in this recycle view. There's no effectively hierarchy. Is just each one renders as a child of this main view, right?
Yeah. So it's just a viewport with tiles. Simple.
Yeah. So
it's not simple, but you know what I mean, right? So, but trying to keep it simple, right? Now, I don't know why I keep doing that. I don't know how I keep doing that. At the moment, I haven't got to this point yet. But when I zoom in at the moment, I'm just resizing those views, right, based on the scale factor. And that's what the scale here is doing. We're just sort of scaling the canvas when we paint the rectangles, and when we eventually put the widgets on the screen, we'll just be scaling those widgets themselves. But what we probably want to do is very much like depending on what we're doing. In case this is, let's say, a mapping product, then probably what you want to do is when you zoom in, you want to subdivide that red rectangle into 4 more tiles and so on. So the more you zoom in, the more it subdivides, right? And then that way it gets one level deeper in terms of that hierarchy you're just mentioning there, Swav, because now we need to have a layer of tiles for the previous one, and now we zoom in, we need another set of tiles, and there is a hierarchy to that because we need to present the newer tiles on top of the older ones visually on the screen, and they need to probably fade in, and it will get a lot more complicated then. So first things first is to get this working.
Because when you're zooming out very quickly, it was a jitter. Essentially, it had to create a new children. Or are you keeping them essentially somewhere?
To be clear, there's no children currently being created, right? So to be clear.
Okay, so you've created this when you start the app, you create only whatever is on the screen, right?
Yeah, but what I'm trying to say is what we see right now is just a viewport with painting. There's no children, right? I haven't attached the children. I haven't got that far yet. That's where we got up to.
Okay.
But yeah, when I zoom out, this is quite laggy. It may not. I don't know how laggy it is on the stream. It feels quite laggy, and that's basically because look how much text I'm rendering in each one. It's not very suboptimal, right?
Sorry, so when you're saying you attaching they're attaching the elements, but I mean the objects that you render, right? The styles. When you create them, you store them and you dispose them, or you have a cache and you reuse the created ones.
They'll be reused. They will be reused. So I haven't got. So that's really the next point.
But essentially it will be. I've created this many. I don't need to destroy them yet because maybe someone's gonna zoom out.
Yeah. So the point I was looking at here with this whole tile slot idea of accountancy for the tiles was to say, okay, does a tile already exist in this tile slot position when I go to that screen? Then I don't have to go create it, right? Something similar to that. But yeah, as I say, haven't really got to that point yet. But this is looking pretty good. It feels good. It feels like it's going in the right direction. That's for sure. And I can see if I download a data set of tiles, let's say map tiles, there's no reason why I couldn't display them and have some fun stuff there. Equally, because the callback could handle the scale, we could actually do so like nice vector tiles as well and have like a nice vector map or something like that. Assuming this is a mapping product, I'm just doing some tiles. This could be a game. So you imagine like this is a game, right? You have a tile in most games. You get like a tile grid, a tile map of different tiles as you move around the level. And this is again a very similar approach to what you would want to take in terms of rendering those. Anyway, yeah.
What if you want to zoom in? You're gonna treat each of them as a separate render object and just generate the smaller tiles inside and just use the same code.
No, I wasn't thinking that. Because the thing is, there's assets that one level might hold on to separate to another. So it would vary. I see someone said like huge effort here. And I mean, there's plenty of widgets out there, right? And the whole point of this is to explore these hierarchies. But also the fact of the matter is, the whole idea of this is a huge effort. This is nothing. Honestly, this is like 400 lines. You try to do this in Android. You try to do this in like other platforms. It's way more complicated. Way more complicated. There's literally libraries and packages made by third-party companies that just do this kind of thing, right? So I love the way you say huge effort, but and it would be, right? But the point here is that that's why we have packages, right? That's why we do this kind of thing, right? But there's a point in which you're building widgets, and you find there's not a widget that does what you want it to do. And at that point, what do? Well, you have to do the layout. You have to do the rendering yourself. Right. Getting back to that point. So this is where random came in earlier, and we're going to get back to that now, quickly. So
Yay.
So in your widget hierarchy, I use tile widget, which does all this kind of fun stuff under the hood, right? And Randall was just saying that we could use custom paint. I'm just going to type it here so we've got a reference so I can show you. And custom paint is a widget that takes a delegate. So specifically, this extends single child render object, so it can only have one child. And you pass it this custom painter, which is the delegate. This custom painter is the thing that actually has the paint routine that you override to do your custom painting, right?
Right.
The idea of this is this custom paint. Again, this custom paint widget abstracts away the need to do a element. It abstracts away the need to do a custom render object. So you use the widget level to give a callback so that during that render object's paint method, it will get called. And if we look down here it is here. So first of all, a single child render. So first of all, let me just go back. A single child render object widget has an element that deals with a single child, right? That's a render object. That's the point, right? So we don't have to think about that. And here, when it creates the render object for the custom paint, it calls render custom paint. And when it updates, it calls these. And when it unmounts, you actually get to null out these lovely things as well, the references. Now, if I go to render custom paint, this is where the magic happens. So first of all, this extends render proxy box. There's a really nice thing to do. If you're ever starting with render objects, I suggest this. Render proxy box just proxies down the tree any of the methods that you don't implement. In short, it's a bit more complicated, but the point here is, let's say you just have to implement like perform layout and give it a size and your paint, and you're done. Super simple. The rest of like how the layout is handled, it will just pass down the tree, and you essentially are transparent. So think of it like a box decorator. It doesn't actually really infer anything to do with layout, anything to do with like the screen. It just doesn't matter. Anyway, moving on. Anyway, so here is again similar thing. It has the painter. If you set the paint is different, it calls this did update painter. Let's skip down, and eventually that says, okay, the painter changed, so it marks that needs to be painted, and it listens to the painter just like I was doing if attached. This just handles the semantical stuff as well, which I'm not doing. Preferred size, complex. This is just like standard, again, all these methods, standard methods, right? And then the key here is that, did I scroll past paint? No, I didn't. Hit test, hit test self, perform layout. And finally, minimize that. So here's the paint method that I was overriding. And as you can see here, if painter is not null, then it calls painter with paint. Sets the raster cache stuff based on the painter result. And here, that's where it calls canvas save, ignoring all this like debug stuff. Literally what it does is it translates where required and calls your paint method that you had in your delegate above that you supplied in the widget level, and then restores the canvas. So literally this entire widget just wraps the fact that you to call this one function. There's some other complexity around this because it offers a couple of other features, but in general, the whole widget is about just wrapping that paint function.
So if you look at the stack of what a custom paint and the custom painter below it and the render boxes below that, your widget that you were just showing for the last 20 minutes is about right in that same zone, but it still has to attach to the widget layer at the top level and attach to render boxes at the bottom, right?
So the reason
that's
why
parallel to it. Yeah,
it's parallel to it. Yeah. So the reason why it's a little bit more complicated. It's the reason why it's a little bit more complicated in my example is because I'm managing a whole set of child widgets, right?
Sure.
That would be the end effort on this. And when a custom paint is just doing the painting, right? There is also a couple of other widgets that people could, if they want to do custom layouts, can actually look at, which is custom multi-child layout, which is a widget, and there's also custom single-child layout. Both have appropriate places, but these two widgets essentially do exactly the same as custom paint, except with a layout. So you give it a delegate, and that delegate has a callback method for it has these ones here, which is like get size. Sorry, it's a bit small. Make it bigger. Has get size, gets constraint for child, get position for child, or whatever, and it should read out. That's single child. And if we go to the multi-child, you'll see something more appropriate here. Multi-child layout delegate. Again, like the painter, does it have this child layout this particular child, position this child? And there's actually if I scooch around all this like boilerplate, there is a function there is perform layout, and that's the one that you implement. And again, this just overrides the perform layout of the render object to position. So this is basically these widgets exist to bring the functionality of the render layer up to the widget layer, right? Using callback methods and slash delegates, right, to achieve that. But they have their purposes. And I probably, if the reason for doing a custom render like I'm doing right now is it's the end result would be more efficient. So the way that I would have to rebuild my children would be to rebuild this widget with a new set of children for a new set of tiles, and I couldn't optimize that as much as I could if I do it myself, right?
Right. You pay for the genericity of the flexibility of the generic thing. Yeah, you pay for that. And you're building a custom thing that has one purpose in life. So therefore you can optimize it in certain ways that you couldn't do simply by calling custom paint, custom painter, and letting them render something at the bottom. Yeah. Okay. Cool. I was also thinking, just aside, you were talking about that layout layer. There's this Boxy package that's really nice about being able to do custom coding at that layer, in case people are curious about really grabbing a hold of your, going from an automatic transmission to a stick shift, basically is what Boxy does. But there's more things you got to know about doing your layout, but it can do pretty much everything you want. So kind of cool stuff. But this is at that layer, not at the rendering layer. The rendering layer still stays the same with this stuff.
So again, this is a very similar. This any of the packages that do like these kind of layout things do a similar thing. You can see here, you provide your children, and then the idea is that further down, it will use this information about the children and your metadata you're providing to actually perform the layout, and then you can do again the same thing like a custom boxy. You see, it's got this custom prefix, which is quite known. As you just saw, custom paint and custom multi-child layout. You provided the IDs, and then you have a delegate, and inside that delegate performs your layout. This is exactly the same mechanism as custom multi-child layout. You provide the children with a set of layout IDs with layout ID widgets, and then inside your layout perform layout delegate, you do get child, layout child, and position child to do your custom layouts basically. But
I'm still waiting for a client to ask me to say, I will need this to do this. And I go, I have just the package. So I haven't used that in production yet, but I'm waiting for the day when somebody says, I want this layout that's crazy like this. So we're waiting.
Yeah.
Cool.
Right. What do we want to do? How long do we have is the question, really.
Well, we have negative 13 minutes, but it's fine. We run over a lot.
Well,
So yeah,
I mean,
I'll be ducking out then, right?
Okay.
Yeah, we could
We
call
should
it here.
probably
And then
wrap this one. Yeah.
I think we'll call it here. What I'll do, I'm going to be finishing this up and probably making it a package and posting it online.
Cool.
I'll be doing that probably over this week, varying hours of this week and the weekend. And then next week we can have a see in action and try some stuff out. I don't know if people are interested.
Cool. And I'll have more war stories about converting stuff from provider to Riverpod for sure, because there's a lot more providers to go through.
Indeed. All right then. Well, thank you everyone for joining us.
Thanks,
start getting your questions in for next week. Was it how many hours is it, Randall?
166, slightly less than that now since we're into the third hour. Yes.
Yeah. All right then. Well, we'll see you again, and thank you for joining us, and see you again next week.
See you.
Bye. Bye.